I am very excited about the next hour. I have a great guest joining me, and we're going to talk about some fabulous things. The extraterrestrial presence on Earth is widening, and as we enter the Aquarian age, will it be admitted officially? Who knows? But if it is, it will cause shock and an urgent universal need to understand the social and technological changes derived from our space brothers and sisters. A primer for the explosive advances humanity will experience scientifically and spiritually in the coming years. This will help, we have to kind of get together and explore the ET phenomena and its influence on humanity, past and present. And my guest tonight, Len Kasten, has written a fabulous book called The Secret History of Extraterrestrials. And his book surveys contact with ETs and abduction accounts, unexplained public and or undisclosed military technology from aliens, including anti-gravity devices, exopolitics, which is the influence of ETs in human affairs, the Iraqi Stargate and the hybrid project of alien interbreeding by abduction, Nazi ties to UFOs and their secret underground base in Antarctica, and government cover-ups galore we're going to be talking about tonight. And he has some great information for us. I've read his book. It's absolutely wonderful. It's got a lot of updated information across the board, really. And he's got a really positive viewpoint on this topic, and I've chosen to bring him on to discuss with us tonight. We are live, so if you have questions on this topic and you would like to speak to Len or myself about this, we are taking calls, and I do want to, before we actually bring him on the line, let you all know that I will be starting a brand new show on World Puja Network, which will broadcast for the first time on March 7th. I will be on that network the first and third Mondays of every month, starting March 7th at 7:30 Pacific time, 10:30 Eastern. I will still be here on Achieve. I'm not going anywhere. And it's just another show. It's a different format, and it's another opportunity to help spread information and get the truth out to the world, which is really what we're doing. And, I just wanted to say, too, I really appreciate all the feedback I get from everybody who listens to the show, and the guest suggestions and the comments on Facebook and people who follow me on Twitter. It's really all about you. The show is about you. It's about getting information out. It's about sharing ideas that aren't mainstream. And I couldn't do this without you listening. So I want to say thank you for joining me. So without further ado, Len, thanks so much for joining me for an hour of wonderful conversation.
My pleasure, Hillary.
So what caused you to really get into this book? What really prompted you to put this material out right now?
Well, actually, the putting together the book took place over a 14-year period because I've been writing articles for Atlantis Rising for 14 years. And basically, each chapter in the book was originally an article in Atlantis Rising. When Inner Traditions took a look at the 52 articles that I had written, they realized that the 30 or so articles that I had written on UFOs and ETs had a narrative drive. It wasn't just simply a compendium. It actually covered the subject. So it made sense to put it together in book form. And strangely enough, even though some of the articles are 14 years old, they are nevertheless very contemporary, even so.
Yeah.
So it all worked. And then, of course, I got the beautiful artwork of Jim Nichols to complement the text, and it really we thought it came out well.
Len, what started you to really explore this topic? Everybody's got a story of their own that really perpetuates their seeker identity into this world. You don't just wake up one day and decide that you want to necessarily jump in and become a UFO researcher. What is your personal story with all of this information?
Well, really, it started for me with metaphysics. I was really studying metaphysics. I studied at the Casey Library in Virginia Beach, and I was a theosophist, a student of theosophy and of astrology, and it sort of led gradually into the UFO phenomenon from metaphysics because they are very much connected. In fact, I think I made this point on my website. It's very difficult to understand the UFO phenomenon without having some background in metaphysics because the aliens themselves are functioning in several dimensions. And if we're limiting our explorations to one dimension, we'll never understand it.
Do you feel that if we are limiting our experience in one dimension, that we tend not to experience them?
As of late, there's been more talk about multidimensional universes. This is like within the past year. People like Bob Dean and others are talking about multidimensional phenomena, and so I think it's finally come around to that. It took a while, though.
Yeah, it did. And I think that, so my question was, do you feel that people who don't tap into the multidimensional aspect of higher consciousness, do you believe that they don't experience this phenomena? Is there a connection between, raising your frequency spiritually and making contact?
I'm not sure that raising your consciousness is a guarantee of making contact with ETs, but I just think all you really need to do to make contact with ETs is to set that intention. And if you really do set that intention, you can make contact.
Yeah. So it takes, to me, I think it takes, my opinion in this is that it takes a level of confidence in who you are to really set that intention, on a good level, on a level that, isn't fearful. Why do you think there's so much fear in this topic in general? When people jump into it, what they usually find are a lot of very scary stories that talk about abduction experiences that aren't very positive. What do you feel that this is? I don't know. Why is it? I guess my question really is, why is that the most common thing?
Because the abduction stories are scary. There's a lot of very scary stuff going on at night. People are being abducted by the millions all over the world. And there is a hybrid program going on, which point I made in the book. There's good reason to be not want to be the subject of painful probings on spaceships and perhaps unwanted pregnancies. So, it's logical. I mean, it's a question of knowing the players, knowing who's involved, knowing which ETs you really want to be in contact with. So because the Greys and the reptilians have been given a free hand in doing what they want to do with us, there's reason to be afraid.
And so what is your experience? I know you have a broad and vast experience with these different stories. Why don't you let's jump into specific topics that we'll cover for the next hour, and, maybe we'll go off into side discussions or we may have calls or something. But what I'm really curious about is what you feel is really going on in Egypt right now. You talk about the Iraqi Stargate in your book, and let's begin there, if you will. We'll go back to what we were just talking about later in the show. What do you feel, what is the Iraqi Stargate?
Well, it's a device that was left behind, I believe. I'm convinced that was the case by the Anunnaki when they left. And I believe that Saddam Hussein had great hopes of using that device, learning how to use it. And if he did, it would be an awesome weapon. It would be an awesome piece of technology that perhaps could literally negate any technological advantage that we had. So there is some information on the internet about this device. I consider it a Stargate. It's been called a Stargate by William Henry. Have you had William Henry on your show?
I haven't, but I know him. So I'm familiar with his work, yes.
So you know that he talks about this at length.
Yes, he does.
And, so Zecharia Sitchin sort of got close to it with his Stairway to Heaven, but he never made that final push to talk about Stargates. It was his viewpoint that the aliens came here in spaceships, rocket-powered spaceships, which, of course, now we know would be impossible. So I think William Henry has a better take on this, that they travel through vast distances, not on physical ships, but through stargates.
Are we talking teleportation here? There's rumors that we have that technology.
Basically.
Okay, so we're talking like a teleportation kind of technology that would allow travel between different worlds, and we're absolutely out of what we're taught in physics class 101 in high school, aren't we? Basically, this is not technology
I made that point in the book about the old physics the old physics no longer applies.
Yeah.
We have a whole new physics now.
So for people listening, the sound of that may sound very unusual, and some people are very familiar with it. There's all kinds of people listening at different understanding levels. But when we're talking about something like this, we're speaking on something that applies to a whole nother world of understanding how physics works and that we're not taught. Now, you talk about something in your book called, I believe, the secret physics, or the other physics that we'll talk about. So there is a whole subculture of high-level scientists and big thinkers and people who really operate on these different laws of physics, correct? Do they understand them at this point? And are they diving into this information so that they can understand this ancient technology?
Well, Paul Laviolette, who I discuss in my book, calls it classified physics. It's the physics that's being used in the black world, the black aerospace world. The scientists and physicists who work for the secret programs in the what we call the black world, or the military-industrial complex, they're using a whole different kind of physics. They already know all about anti-gravity. They know about free energy from the vacuum. They had to. Now they're not going to put that out there because it would create an energy revolution, and it would free us all from the need for fossil fuels. But we're not graduating physicists who know this new physics. And Paul makes that point in his book, the anti-gravity. Paul Laviollette's book about anti-gravity. So we have only a few pioneers, like somebody like Michio Kaku and the people of that stripe, who are finally getting to the truth little by little. But it's not being put out there.
Yeah, Paul's his book was called "The Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion."
Right, exactly.
And it's an incredibly important book for people to read and to understand. One of the questions I get asked a lot, and I would like your opinion on this, is if these people are exposing and disclosing such confidential information and such, super classified, how are they able to publish books, and how are they able to really, how are they allowed to really talk about these programs and this kind of information?
Well, they're not. That's the point. Paul's a renegade. He gets away with it because he's such a brilliant physicist, and because he has such a great background in other subjects, archaeology and mythology. He's able to put it all together. The average physicist who comes out of the universities today doesn't have that kind of a broad stroke that Paul does. So Paul was able to put it together.
So having the broad background that he had in archaeology and all of the other areas of study that the dots were easier to connect.
Exactly, because the physicists and scientists working under black programs are sworn to secrecy, and they're never going to reveal anything. So they're afraid of having their families killed or them getting killed. I mean, that's how serious it is.
Yeah. No, it isn't just something that people just decide to write a book one day and expose something and then they go about their lives. So there's real repercussions with getting into the world of exposing this. Now, now that we really are kind of, because of the internet, able to share this information with the masses, with people all over the world, and information is coming out on large levels. And, people don't understand why we can't get off our you-know-whats and do something about the energy technology. I've had Dr. Greer on. I've had his scientists in his program on. I've talked to a lot of people. I've brought a lot of researchers on the air to discuss free energy technology. And when I have a conversation with somebody, in fact, I had one this evening before the show, and I was talking about what we were going to be discussing tonight with this person, and they said, well, I don't understand why people don't, get really excited about this information and demand it. And, what are your thoughts on that? Why weren't people standing up and saying, enough is enough? We want to know now what's really going on.
Well, when you say demanded, when you talk about science and you talk about physics, it has to be done on a large scale. It has to be on a university level. The science departments of most of the large universities, I'm talking even the Ivy League universities, are very, very conservative. They're not going to go out on a limb with these new technologies. First of all of their funding will dry up. All their corporate funding will go away. They'll have no further link with the military-industrial complex, which they rely on heavily. Why would they do such a thing?
Yeah,
they are literally afraid to. Even if there is occasionally a renegade or an iconoclastic scientist that wants to do it, he's quickly silenced. Look what happened with Carl Sagan.
We're just coming up to break, so just for the webpage, you can go to CapricornRadio.com for the free archives and CapricornMembers.com for the HD TV and MP3 archives. But for now, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back in just a moment. There is something majestic in the land of Ireland. This is known the world over. The Celtic Irish are descendants of the Tuatha De Danann, a mysterious, supernatural race of gods written about in ancient Irish Gaelic texts. This is the basis for all Irish mythology, and our megalithic ancestors are interlinked with these peoples. You have a chance to come and see these monuments and temples for yourself. The megalithic landscape is rich in the realms of myth, legend and wisdom. Come see all this on the most spectacular Sacred Sites tour in March 2016. The Sacred Sites and Equinox tour is not to be missed. Tour highlights include Grinnin of Ailloch Observatory, the Giant's Ring Henge and Dolmen, St. Patrick's Day Special at St. Patrick's Ancient Chair, March 17th, Knockmany Passage Tomb linked to the Queen Maeve with special access, Beemore Temple Complex, Dunluce Castle, the Giant's Causeway, Beltany Stone Circle, Kilclooney Dolmen, and the Loughcrew Equinox Event Alignment. Of course, we will see the famous tombs of Newgrange, Noath and Doath, also Fornox Rock Art and Shamanic Chamber, Tara Hill Complex, and we're going to finish at the Tuatha De Danann's origins in the northwest of Ireland at Carrowkeel, dated 3500 BC, and the famous Carrowmore 5000 BC complex. Check out all the full itinerary on the tours events page for more details at jamesswagger.com. Welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and don't forget to check out the archives at CapricornMembers.com. You can subscribe for membership, doing a lifetime membership deal at the moment. And of course you can still check out the free archives at CapricornRadio.com. And then HD TV shows as well on the Capricorn Members page. But for now...
So we're talking about a complete collapse of structures. If we do endorse this kind of technology and information revolution, so to speak.
Exactly. That's exactly
so what does
right.
an average person do? I mean, the average person doesn't really have access to changing institutions that are ingrained with these kind of connections and dependencies, but they definitely... if they want it, what do? Do they build it themselves? Do they research it? Do they share information? I mean, where do we start as a grassroots movement to change the world into something that is sustainable on a level that we all want?
Well, I believe it's the 100th monkey kind of thing. I think the more people that do become educated about it and pressure the media and pressure the universities to forge ahead with this, that's the only way it's going to happen. And books like Paul's books being written and getting out there. Of course, I don't know His book wasn't exactly a bestseller, but it did make an impression. Something has to happen on a larger scale than's happening now. These are just guerrilla attacks right now. These are just guerrilla attacks. They're not having any real true. I think Stephen Greer is probably doing more about it than anybody else that I know of.
Yeah, Stephen's doing great work actually out there, and he's doing a lot of forging forward through the muck kind of work too, where he gets a lot of slack for things that I believe he is getting based on, other people working against the agenda and other things of that sort. But he really does have, the ability to share on large levels with people. So I appreciate you adding a chapter in the book on his work, because his work is important to the expansion.
Work what he's doing, very important.
Yes. Now, Iraqi Stargate, okay, so we have these, so basically let's build the scenario here. We have these ancient cultures around the world, these megalithic builders who, were able to perform these incredible archaeological feats of, mastery that we can't reproduce now with all the skills and knowledge and technology that we have. So they left us a message, I believe, that, around the world, that, putting things together, how to really connect with different unseen forces and, geomancy and those kinds of things, and understanding the Earth's energy and the magnetic fields. They left a roadmap. And, my personal journey started with really being called to see these places in person. And I've traveled around the world, as many people have, gone to see these sites, and nobody can deny what they feel when they walk around in them or when they put their hands on the walls and just intuitively connect in. Are we looking at, our current cultures really looking kind of like an Indiana Jones movie, going back to these ancient cultures and digging around for transcripts, scrolls, things written on rock to describe what kind of technology, giving the missing pieces of the puzzle, so to speak? Do you think that is really an agenda within the Black world?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think Von Daniken started it. And it took a while for it to gain momentum, but I think with the advent of Tsoukalos, who took over for Von Daniken and whose program on ancient aliens is absolutely wonderful, and it's starting to take root. I think Sitchin, of course, had a lot to do with it, but and Sitchin became very, very well known. I think people are beginning to realize that the ancient civilizations did have very incredible technology that we're just beginning to appreciate. Certainly the Great Pyramid of Giza is a good example of that, but these other sites all over the world are amazing. They're amazing how they moved like 100-ton boulders in place. I mean, how could they possibly have done that? So the hints, we're getting hints of what they actually were able to do, but we don't know really what to make of it. We don't really know how to put the pieces together yet.
Well, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that our history was hijacked. Our true history was hijacked, and it's been manipulated through the institutions, the very institutions that we graduate from and try to make a living from, the very institutions that could change the world, but won't because of the funding and the connections. And if we were taught our true history, if we were taught the truth about our history, I believe that people would intuitively, through consciousness, make those connections a lot easier. So what are your opinions on Egypt right now? Let's look at this. There's a lot of rumors popping up on the internet that this is going a little bit further and deeper into the same kind of realm that Iraq took. When we went into Iraq in 2003, there was more looting, I should say, and theft of artifacts. Different archaeological sites were dug in like no other time before, and there was a lot of what seemed to be kind of looking for something. And the same thing with Afghanistan. There were very specific Babylonian artifacts taken out of the museum when we invaded Afghanistan, and now we're looking at Egypt's museum being looted. Do you think that I'm not saying that this is the reason that Egypt is in the state that it is, but do you think that it's being exploited for a UFO connection?
Well, you read my book, so you know what I had to say about the Iraqi invasion and how they looted the museum there deliberately. And Michael Salla, of course, was the first to write about that, and using a lot of information that he got from William Henry. But it became obvious that the Marines did not defend the National Museum of Baghdad for a reason, and that perhaps the looting of the museum was really the main reason we were there in the first place. I found out that there were 5,000 scrolls that were taken out of the museum depicting ancient Mesopotamian scenes, and it may be that we wanted to see those in order to understand how this Stargate functioned. And that's what Michael Salla said, and William Henry is of the same opinion. So, why did we allow the museum to be looted? Clearly, it was a stupid thing to do, unless we were doing the looting ourselves. Now, in terms of Egypt, I don't know if that's a motive or not. I have heard some opinions to the effect that perhaps there is a Stargate in Giza, and of course, the director of antiquities in Egypt, Zawi Hawass, is very protective of everything there. Perhaps perhaps this is a component of what's going on, but I have a whole different take on what's going on in Egypt right now.
Well, let's hear it.
I don't think it has anything to do with the antiquities. I think what's been happening is that I don't like to get into politics, and I'm not political, but I do think that most of these nations in the Middle East have been ruled either by kings or strongmen for decades. And there is a fresh breeze of democracy blowing through there right now. People are beginning to realize that why do we need to be ruled by a strongman? I mean, it's happening in Yemen right now, too. They really finally are taking steps to get to bring democracy into these countries. Why they have been willing to put up with this kind of I wouldn't call it tyranny. I'd call it just a dictatorship, and a repressive dictatorship for so many years is not clear to me. But evidently now they've had enough, and I think that's what's going on. They really want.
Well, I agree. I think that I've been to Egypt a few times myself. I have seen the poverty and the way that they live firsthand. I have close friends who live in the country, and it's a beautiful thought that was started in somebody's heart that spread throughout Egypt to come together and join for the betterment of their own humanity. And I think that is the seed that started this entire thing. And It is a beautiful moment of recognition of equality and wanting basic human rights. And I think that we have to acknowledge that. We also have to acknowledge that there are people who exploit things of this sort for their own purposes and their own agendas. And unfortunately, we're seeing that now. And when that happens, we see a clash of violence. We see things open up in more of a different stance that comes from another kind of energy. And unfortunately, people who perhaps are looking, I do really feel that is an alternative agenda. It may not be what started it, but I think that something has been discovered in the area. And I think that there is some serious looking into that, and there are things that are missing. I would love to see the list of missing things from the museum, because I don't know if you've been there yourself. It's a beautiful.
I have been there. Yeah, I've been to Egypt, and Zawi Hawass made a statement 2 days ago. He said that nothing important has been taken. So that was 2 days ago. I don't know where it stands at the moment.
Yeah, well, I hope it's true. But but Zawi Hawass, does a wonderful job of protecting when he wants to, but he also has, he won an Emmy from Hollywood here, and he has his own show. And so there's a lot of things that he's been able to do that most have not been able to do out of that country. So, who knows? Connections run deep sometimes.
I put it all under the heading of the raising of consciousness that's happening all over the world. Consciousness is starting to expand in general. What's behind it, I don't know, but I think that's one of the effects of this consciousness raising that's beginning to take place. People are beginning to realize who we are and why we're here and how we've all been repressed.
I think it's a beautiful mirror that we're watching, actually, because this information cannot stay hidden forever. There's just too much, there's too much birthing it out into the world. And people are starting to wake up out of their doldrum state of mind and, their basic, because we're not meant to live in that kind of hamster wheel. That's what I call it, a hamster wheel.
Exactly. I agree with that.
And I really do feel that there's some, intuitively, I've picked up on some connections between the Afghanistan, and it'll be very interesting to watch the events that happen and how things unfold in Egypt. I think we need to watch it very closely. But my heart and prayers go out to those who are living there and whose intention is to empower the people. I think they're doing the right thing. And I feel very strongly that I stand with them in spirit, that, they really do come out on the other end more strengthened, more strong, more free from all of this.
Absolutely. And I think that will happen. I do think that will happen. And I think, believe it or not, I'm going to make a link now to this that you may find questionable, but I really think it has something to do with the pending disclosure and the landing of the mass landing of the aliens. I think that this is preparation for what's going to be happening, I think, very soon.
Well, I agree. I agree with that.
That's what's going on. That's what's going on here, because there's no point in the aliens, the extraterrestrials, making a mass landing to a hostile civilization. There's no point in it. What would they accomplish? If the people are not ready for the landing, nothing would be gained by it. They'd just be at odds with each other. So in order for that to happen, the corruption has to be eliminated in advance. And I think that's what's happening now. I'm not sure who's bringing it about exactly, but I think that it's happening not only in politically, it's also happening financially. It's happening with Wall Street. It's happening with bankers. It's happening with the fossil fuels. It's like a strong wind of reform seems to be blowing over the entire planet. And I think this has to do with the pending revelation and mass landing by the extraterrestrials. That's my
feeling. So do you think that, I agree, I think that that's a very valid point. Do you think that we are being prepared for that by the slow leak of information into consciousness, into the average person's consciousness through movie and film and, commercials even? I mean, I have children and I can't tell you how many commercials and books that they read that have nothing to do with, quote, alien topics, but yet there is always an underlying theme. How many movies come out of Hollywood with this incredible theme? It's a nonstop, and it's been exponentially increasing across the board for quite some time now. And 2011, I believe there are 6. I could be wrong, but I believe there are 6 major motion films coming out. There's a film coming out in June that's titled Cowboys and Aliens. And if you think about that, most of us grew up with the cowboy and Indians theme, fighting the Indians when we came in and really just wiped out the indigenous cultures. That was just how they, subconsciously handled us associating the, wiping out of a certain kind of individual, a race, a culture, by making it something that kids would play at very young ages. And now we're moving into cowboys and aliens. And so I see that as a symbolic reference to, it's almost like a brainwashing. I have to be honest with you. It's almost like a brainwashing.
Stephen Hawking warned us that what the aliens, the coming of the aliens, he equated it to the coming of the conquistadors to the Americas, and he said, look what happened to the Native Americans when that happened. And he tried to draw that parallel that they may do the same thing to us as we did to the Indians. But I'm not buying that. I don't think that's the case now at all. I think that
Did you used to think that was the case?
His viewpoint was that they could be hostile and they could be coming just to take over the planet. I think that's what he was saying, I guess, which I found kind of ridiculous, really.
Yeah, I think most people do, to be honest with you.
Yeah, since he wasn't a believer in extraterrestrials anyway, that makes sense. No, I do think that we're getting ready for this, and we've been the entire planet has been kept in a state of media manipulation and repression of information for so long that we can't recognize the truth anymore. So something has to happen to expose us to the truth and to let us see through what's going on. And unless we do that, we're not going to be ready for this for the change of our civilization that's going to come about when the aliens do arrive and do land.
Well, I just want to let everybody know listening that if you would like to learn more about Len Kasten's work, you can go to his website, which is et-secrethistory.com, and you can find out more about his book and his topics. I want to read something. This is Robert Bauval quotes and endorses this book. He says, with our present knowledge of the cosmos, there is now a real possibility of evolved and intelligent civilizations elsewhere in the vast cosmological space. The secret history of extraterrestrials is a must for the libraries of all seekers of truth with unbiased minds. And I would just like to agree with that, because I have read the book, and I think it's a very important part of any real seeker's collection. I'd like to switch gears, and you do talk about, well, not really switch gears, but this is an interest of mine particularly. The Nazis, Germany, World War II, the connection with their occult discoveries and also their AT technologies and what they were encountering, and how they, when World War II was over, how we kind of assimilated that technology by taking in their scientists and the people working on those projects, and they're continued today within this country. You claim on your website that the Germans built a time machine in 1922 for communicating with Aldebaran. Let's start there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that I think that came out in Preston Nichols' book on the Montauk project. If you've read that, or that it went underground in 1924, but it emerged again at Montauk when a lot of the ex-Nazi scientists came over here and they were working on the time machine at Montauk Point, which I think you may know they did succeed in achieving time travel. And it really did start with that German invention in 1924. But the purpose of the German invention, which they called the otherworldly time machine, was really interdimensional. And the intent was to get through to another dimension. In order to get through to Aldebaran, which is like, I think, 50 light years away from Earth, it was a question. They did understand even then that the only way they could do that was to get through to another dimension. And they wanted to set up that communications between the civilizations in the Aldebaran star system and Germany. And you may know that the Sumerian language which is the oldest language on Earth, is very similar to the language that was coming through these mediums, supposedly from Aldebaran. So there was that connection. That's what started it. That evolved into the manufacture of actually flying saucers and anti-gravity technology, which the Nazis did accomplish. You know that, right?
Yes. So basically, for those listening, to sum it up, Hitler had psychics working on channeling information from this particular star system.
That's right.
And they were drawing diagrams, and they actually channeled the construction, quote, well, kind of blueprints, if you will, to build this technology, correct?
Right, yes. Mm-hmm. And that became the RFZ-1, which was the first flying saucer, which really derived from the interdimensional technology that the mediums had channeled, particularly one medium by the name of Maria Orsic, who was the key person in this, and her diagrams resulted in the construction of that very first flying saucer, the RFZ-1. That particular saucer actually crashed and burned, but the second one worked very well, and then they were creating huge saucers by 1944. So they had the technology.
Now, when we brought them over here after the war, do you feel that the Roswell incident was part of this continuation of technology?
Well, here's my thinking. I put this into the book. My theory on this is that the entire worldwide fascist movement, which I have on the 2 chapters I've written on World War II, was an attempt to deliberate attempt to actually physically take over the planet. It was using the fascist governments as pawns by the extraterrestrials. This is a different group of extraterrestrials we're talking about, to actually physically take over the planet and enslave the planet. And it failed. It failed because they bet on the wrong horse. They bet on Hitler, and he wasn't up to it.
Uh-huh.
But
I see.
they came very close, because they really, they almost had nuclear weapons by the end of the war.
Would you say that World War II was an extraterrestrial battle, in a sense, underneath all of the other stuff that was built on top of it?
I think it was. I think it was a bold attempt to actually take over and enslave the planet. Since it didn't work, in other words, they couldn't physically take over the planet, they shifted to a different technique. It then became a question of mind control. And I think that that's what we've been subjected to since the 50s, is mass mind control.
Now, I have to ask this question because I know that this is on the minds of people listening. What about, the atrocities that we're so familiar with World War II? If this was the case, then what were they really doing with exterminating the Jews?
Well, supposedly Hitler made a treaty with the gray aliens who were also involved with the reptilians in 1933. He was involved with the Thule Society, which was an occult society, and they in turn made that treaty with the aliens, and that's how all these wonderful weapons came into the hands of the Nazis. These people, the aliens that Hitler was dealing with, were ruthless and merciless. And that particular group of aliens was behind the entire worldwide fascist movement, as far as I can see. And naturally, killing and torturing was not something they were concerned about. It came very easy to them. And fortunately, they lost.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. It's a hard thing to swallow, I think, for people who are emotionally attached and they think about that part. And when you look into the experiments that were done on people, this really was, I believe, more of an experiment, genetic experiment, if you will. And they were doing these horrible things in these camps with human beings, and it wasn't just because they didn't like them. I believe there was other things going on, and I think that's a territory that is tough for people to really explore without getting into the emotional energy that surrounds it. And it's something that, maybe we can come back to in another show even and talk about, but I don't want to dismiss what happened in that sense, because I think that when you really start to look underneath, it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz, there is something working behind the curtain with that entire time period. And it's something that we still really, we have in a sense carried on that mindset and mentality within this country with the way that we treat people and the way that we experiment and the way that we continue this power mongering within the world, really. And I think that it's something that people really have to start looking closer at, our connection with World War II and how we really just opened our arms to these people who we were so crucifying on the world platform, but yet really taking in to take over their technology and their research in this area. Before we end, I would like to go into a couple of different areas. I apologize. The hour goes by so quick.
That's okay. Hello?
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I wanted to talk about Serpo.
Okay.
And for those people who aren't familiar with Serpo, why don't you give us some background in what that even means?
Well, it's really a remarkable story that, one of the aliens that in the ship that crashed at Roswell did survive. 4 died, but 1 did survive, and he became known as EVE number 1. And he was taken to Los Alamos laboratories in New Mexico, where the Los Alamos scientists really studied him and worked with him, and they developed the ability to communicate with him. And it turned out that he had a device they had a device on the crash disk for communicating with his home planet. And they attempted to do that. They weren't able to do it successfully until they hooked it up to the energy source on the crash disk, and then the scientists at Los Alamos were able to actually communicate with the home planet of the alien that survived. But he didn't survive very long. He died in the summer of 1952. But following that, the scientists continued working with it, and they eventually were able to communicate with his home planet. It took them about 9 or 10 years to actually iron out all the wrinkles, but they did. And they then they made an arrangement for the craft to come back here, and it was going to come back to pick up the bodies of the 11 aliens that had died in those crashes. But by that time, President Kennedy was in office, and he decided to make it into an exchange program. He said, I want to send people to that planet, and we'll keep one here. And it was sort of the first diplomatic exchange interstellar diplomatic exchange program. And we did that. We sent 12 astronauts to the planet, which turned out to be the name of it was Serpo. We found out later, for a period of 13 years.
Was this why he was killed?
Well, I just threw out that possibility for the following reason. He gave the edict for that program in 1963, and they started training the astronauts in late 1963. Kennedy was very, very vehemently opposed to government secrecy. A lot of people now know that. And my thought was that he was probably going to make that landing public.
Yeah.
And have it televised. And possibly a lot of people didn't want that to happen. He was assassinated only 5 months before the landing. The landing took place in April of 1964. But they came back again and actually picked up the 12 astronauts in 1965. And they left. And Steven Spielberg, that's the movie Close Encounters. The last scene in the movie was based on that story.
I was just going to ask you that, if that was what we were. And that movie really, they didn't want that made. Not really. And it didn't stay out too long. But it caught in people's consciousness because we are all connected to this anyway, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. They were there for 13 years because they lost track of time. They were only supposed to stay there for 10 years. And they returned in 1978. 2 of them died on Serpo, and 2 of them chose to stay there. So only 8 came back.
And so Kennedy, who was in the know with all of these, and his family was also, I believe, was assassinated before this was going to go public.
I think his plan was to make it public because that was his modus operandi. He did not believe in government secrecy, and that's really one of the reasons he gave the edict for the moon trip was to get that going. And but he could not talk about this until it was further developed, as far as I can see.
Who was behind Serpo?
When you say who's behind it?
I mean, who was behind it as far as making it happen?
Well, the Defense Intelligence Agency was the main agency behind it, but the Air Force was tasked with the problem of training the astronauts and doing the day-to-day, the functional work. But the DIA really was the agency involved with it, and that they were the ones who leaked 2005. That's how we got the information.
So if somebody wants to really understand more information about this, where does one go to for reliable sources?
The website is out there, and it's very informative, www.serpo.org. It's tremendous.
Now, some people have said that some people have said that this website, I've checked out the website, actually, you do mention it in your book, that it's a disinformation website, that it's something that's built up there to mislead us or to give us false information, that if it was really this important and, we killed a president over it, why would it be allowed to be on the internet?
Well, there is a program of public acclamation. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
They do want to start. They have been trying to release this information slowly, just like letting steam out of a steam kettle. Because if they didn't do that, and through fictional means, through people like Steven Spielberg, by presenting it as entertainment, if they didn't do that, then the final shock when it was revealed would be so tremendous, it would be worse than the War of the Worlds scenario in 1937.
Yeah.
So they've had to do a lot of this deliberately, and it's the people that are behind this are not all bad guys. There's a lot of them are trying to get this information out, and I think that's why we're able to get a lot of it, because they've made up their mind they're going to let the world know about it.
This topic is a really fascinating, very vast, and very deep subject. And when people first start getting their feet wet in it, they're met with an overwhelming amount of vast information to process. Exactly. And I agree that the information is coming out in ways to train our consciousness, our minds, our whole being, so to speak, to be able to accept the reality. So disclosure, everybody wants disclosure to happen. I think it has happened in many different ways that we don't necessarily see as disclosure. And we are changing as a species in the way that we see and react to these kinds of events, and people like yourself who bring this information to the public, who share books and, 14 years worth of articles to really, help people put the dots together themselves and have their own experiences and be informed as to what's going on is part of that. And
right,
it's not that all people behind this are bad or working with, evil aliens, and it's all just, we all need to fight it. I want to say thank you, Len, for this hour. The information you shared has been fantastic, and I don't think we're going to have time to get him back. But his website, again, is et-secrethistory.com. His book is The Secret History of Extraterrestrials by Len Kasten. And, just a word to all of you listening. These topics are fascinating for a reason, and they call on you for a reason. And as you evolve spiritually and as you learn to better know yourself, you begin to realize that life takes on so many other forms that we may have never believed possible. And that goes way beyond just our planet Earth.